This week on the I Love Funny Women podcast.
First thing I posted, they just said like hashtag FYP, FYP. I'm like, what the heck is FYP? They're like, for your page. I'm like, what does that mean? Yeah, I finally shaved like a few months ago. It was literally like killing a rainforest. Like there was a whole ecosystem that had to be destroyed. Like the natives were displaced. Every dystopian show I ever watched is always an act, and there is no armpit hair. Like this is fake.
Welcome to the I Love Funny Women podcast with your host, Dina Nina.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the I Love Funny Women podcast. I'm your host, Dina Nina Martinez.
And I'm Lalita Dee.
I'm so excited to have you here today. Happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride. I know, it's June. It's so exciting.
And we got to share the stage last week together in real person, like human touching and hugging.
It's been incredible to be back doing on-stage comedy. I was in New York City. I opened for Zarna Garg on Caroline's on Broadway, and I walk into Caroline's. It's packed. Everybody's sitting, whatever the people version of bumper to bumper is, no masks. Like there are, and in the Bay, we're still a little bit more conservative, I think, around the mask wearing. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. And that lasted 30 seconds because, I mean, it was a comedy show in one of the great comedy clubs. It was amazing.
Oh, I'm so jealous. So Thursday was my first time on stage in 2.5 years. And I couldn't sleep the night after because I was buzzing so much because it was so nice to be on stage in front of people, hugging and touching. And
I was okay with doing Zoom comedy, but now I'm like, I need a break from that. I think it'll come back eventually. I think people will get tired of going out all the time, but right now, and the audience was just, they were so ready to laugh. People need to be out so badly.
Yeah, and we're going to give them plenty of opportunities, both virtually and in person. Hey! Woo! As always, we would love to hear from you. So go on over to Instagram and post a video and tag at I Love Funny Women with the hashtag HeyDina. And you could possibly be on the podcast or even on our YouTube.
And if you could give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast, we'd be ever so grateful. Your review helps our visibility on the platform, and we want everyone to hear these funny women.
Hey, this is Dorgirl Greg. Thank you for listening to the I Love Funny Women podcast. If you haven't by now, you should really go to the socials and check out at I Love Funny Women on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and on YouTube, because really, what else are you going to do?
All right, this week in the news. While we begin to open up and return to our sense of normality, the thing we're not talking about is growing. We've barely heard anything about COVID. I mean, except for the usual, I don't want to wear a mask and get vaccinated thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
As we swept the real issues under the rug, they formed a bit of a bump that we keep tripping over. Like 601,000 deaths.
Ooh.
Avert your eyes, you know?
God, so many. Hey, but can we talk about Euro 2020?
What's that?
You're joking, right?
No.
Gina, really? What's the matter with you? Okay. It's the European soccer tournament that happens every 4 years and should have taken place last year, but didn't because of COVID.
No.
Because of the lockdown, the players couldn't get hairdressers appointments, so they had to cancel the tournament. Euro 2020, it's like Eurovision, but with more
Oh, okay. And a lot more abs.
A lot more abs.
Last week, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops decided to make a political statement by putting forth a movement that would disallow public figures who openly support abortion rights to take communion.
What?
Right, like President Joe Biden. I think this is a little petty, don't you?
Yeah. But, you know, they say the current Pope, like, he's super liberal because he supports, he tolerates gay people. Yeah, which I think is big of him because as a queer person, I can't stand Catholics.
Fair.
Right? Naomi Osaka has withdrawn from Wimbledon because of her ongoing mental health concerns. You know, to me, that really evidences how hard it is for women of color to function in white supremacist institutions like the world of tennis or the British royal family. No lie, huh?
No lie at all. The Supreme Court this week dismissed a challenge to Obamacare in a 7-2 decision. The decision solidifies that Affordable Care Act's legitimacy, and even Amy Coney Barrett was for dismissing it.
Amy, what's she of anti-abortion rights fame? That's good news, right?
Yeah, but abortion rights are still coming up on the docket, so there are plenty of opportunities for her to really disappoint us.
Oh, I'm sure she will. Dina, I've got some hot off-the-press news in the celebrity section. Elizabeth Olsen married Robbie Arnett in 2020.
Ooh.
Yes, I am so excited to read more and find out who the hell these people are. Do you have any ideas?
I have no idea. Like, no clue.
Very happy for the couple.
Mazel.
Hey, so we got another federal holiday, Dina.
I know, Juneteenth, a holiday that was born in my home state of Texas because slave owners decided not to tell their slaves that they were free for like 2 years.
Oh, that's not petty.
Not petty at all. And that's all the time we have for the news this week.
Our sexologist, Renee Hayden, is still out on holiday, so no sex with the stars this week. No sex without the stars either. Am I right, Dina?
You're right.
But she'll be returning in July with all new segments. Segments.
I'm Tour Girl Greg, and you're listening to the I Love Funny Women podcast.
This week I had the opportunity to sit down with a Bay Area comedian who I adore.
Oh, she is my good friend. She is the CEO and over royalty of Bangu Productions, which produces online and hybrid comedy events that center BIPOC, women, differently abled, and LGBTQ plus people that are often marginalized in comedy. They're always marginalized in comedy.
Always. All the time. So please welcome Cynthia in public. So I am really excited to have you. Thank you so much. You're based in the Bay Area.
Yes.
And you're a queer comic who's here in the house.
Tried mine.
I adore you. I'm so glad that this sounds crazy, but I'm glad we were able to move to virtual and actually meet each other because you think about all the people that we've met on virtual.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I feel extremely thankful because there's so many people that I never would have met if we hadn't been stuck in the house due to a global pandemic and apocalypse for an entire year. But like I feel like I'm having so many connections. Like I've actually seen people like from virtual to real life, and it's just like, whoa, you're a person. You're shorter than I thought, but yeah, it's cool. And like the relationships do carry over.
Yeah, and I think that like I'm not grateful that the pandemic happened for so many reasons, but there are things that I love about what happened during it. So, and you're one of them. How did you get started in comedy?
So I've always wanted to. So when I was a kid, let's just say I wanted to do 20,000 things, like literally 20,000 things. Like the biggest one, I think the number one job was actually superhero, but like apparently I like looked into the whole process and like I do not want to get sued. But like one of the things that I did want to do was I had a really tough childhood growing up. And I was that one person in the family that was always making jokes and trying to get people to smile and laugh. And I felt like it really got us through the tough times together as a family. So I was like, oh, I'd love to do stand-up comedy one day, you know. It wasn't necessarily as like a professional comedian, but like, you know, I was like, oh, I'd love to do it. So growing up, my family is just like hilarious, just like in terms of like storytelling and the way that we talk and how just like the way that we interact. There's like so much comedy in our day-to-day life that it's amazing. So it wasn't so much that I saw like his particular special. It was just like growing up with so many people that like just love laughing so much. It's just like I just want to laugh for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Come college time, I try a open mic a few times. So it was like Cafe for Scotty here in San Jose. Basically, I was there right when it started, but I didn't continue forward. I just did it a few times. I stopped. Then fast forward 5 years later, I had a breakup, really bad breakup. I got out of an abusive relationship. First thing I do is I go to Miami to get over dumping him, and I do a stand-up set. And then I came back and I did more stand-up set, and then more, and then more. And then like I went from like once a week to like twice a week to 3 times a week to like 4 to 5 times a week. And I was going pretty big up until COVID hit. So I would say I'm still about a year and a half in.
Okay.
But I feel like what happened during COVID is that when it happened, I kind of saw it happening. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to start virtual shows. And I started the CCC show. So it was one of the very first Bay Area virtual comedy shows. And then I think one of the first comedy shows in the US, if not the world. I don't know. But like we basically started like literally 2 or 3 days after.
In the world.
We started a few days after things closed up. It was just like this. Because I was just like, I'm in the health field. This is going to take a while. People don't wear masks. Or like masks weren't a thing back then. I was like, people don't. They don't stay home.
Right.
Yeah. So
and
I
people
think,
are obstinate.
Yeah. So I think I've definitely increased my comedy mileage, maybe not years, last year, because I did like well over 100 shows, Zoom, and then like a few in-person mics at the very start. And I just keep going.
That's amazing. And that's one of the things that I really believe. Like, so one of my students that I know of consistently performed throughout virtual shows throughout the pandemic, and the growth that she got from it is incredible. Like, and it's kind of like it was if you're just starting and you want it, it was kind of like, okay, let's put you into a boot camp, essentially. Because it's harder to do virtual because you don't have that same connection.
You don't. I honestly, so I abhor people. Not, I don't hate them, but I don't like people that have the mentality that a Zoom comedy isn't real comedy. Because I'm like, what is TV comedy? Like sometimes you're not always going to have a studio audience. Sometimes there'll be like 2 or 3 producers there. Sometimes you won't even see the crowd, which was Alameda Comedy Club last week. I couldn't see the crowd at all. So like, I just have to keep going as if like everything I did was funny, and I think it's definitely like, there's some jokes that do work on Zoom that don't work in real life, vice versa. But I think that Zoom comedy really teaches you that whole tenacity that you kind of need for real life. And then the best thing was like, I didn't have to leave my house. So you could do so many more sets in one day than you ever could. Like just like, spending 3 hours driving around the Bay Area just to do like 2 or 3 sets. You could do that in like an hour at home.
Yes.
And you didn't have to worry about safety. You could just boot out someone you didn't like. And so much like
I love that. And I agree with that 100%. Like I was talking to some people at the beginning and I was like, if you go into a TV studio, most of the time, or an audition, you're going to be doing your set and they're not going to respond at all. So you might as well get used to it. And it's just about keeping up and going. And I love that you had that tenacity and you've done it. And now we're opening up. I haven't done my first live set since 2019, but I am or 2020, early 2020. But I haven't shaved since 2019, so that's a
yeah. I finally shaved like a few months ago. It was literally like killing a rainforest. Like there was a whole ecosystem that had to be destroyed. Like the natives were displaced. I felt so bad, but like I got my oil, which is I guess like a barren pussy. I guess I don't know. Can I say pussy? I don't know.
Yes, you can say what. I always say, like when I know that I'm getting ready to have sex, I post something like, let the deforestation begin, you know, like you're just colonializing your vagina, you know. Like, how did all these white people move into my cooch?
Yeah, you know, I wish I could say I had been shaving and like for sexual partners. I had like 2020. I'm just like, you know what? Fuck, the world is ending. You really want me to shave my armpits? Like, the only reason I shaved last month was because like it was getting so long, I had to like detangle the hair to wash it, and I'm like, this is too much. I can't be detangling my head hair and then like my armpit and my pussy hair. Like, this is too much. Like when they're like starting to like literally knot up, and like I'm just like, no, this is too much.
Yeah, I've come to the point where when I go to the restroom in my office building, that I have to make sure that that I dust the pubes off the seat before I leave. I was like, this is not okay. But I need to travel. I need to be in a hotel room to shave, especially when I haven't shaved in a long time, because I'm not going to shave at my own house because it's going to clog up the and somebody else will deal with that out of a hotel room, right?
That's my evil, and I'm for it. I'm for it.
That's my pube shaving. You know, like I generally will do it when I'm booked for a gig and I'm in a hotel and they put me in a hotel.
But why like for, I guess if you're like flapping your arms. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's
I don't know. I literally got to a point where I was just like, it was like 2020. And like I had to go in because I work in like the medical field, so like I did have to go into work, and like it was kind of a warm day. I literally walked in tank tops, raising my arms over. I'm like, I don't give a shit. The world is ending. Deal with it.
Right? Like I don't care. Like I don't shave, but I don't have a whole lot of under.
Like I literally like every dystopian show I ever watched is always inaccurate because like I'm looking at them, I'm like, I'm sorry, there's no stubble and there is no armpit hair. Like this is fake. This is fake as well.
You ain't got leg hair.
3 years, but somehow you find a razor to shave yourself. But like, no, you can't kill that zombie. Oh no.
Mila Jovovich had a razor the entire Resident Evil franchise. Like she shaved that's not real. If there's a zombie, I'm not gonna be worrying about my pink razor, my Gillette Venus, whatever you call it.
Oh yeah, the pink one that they charge you $2 extra for because it's pink.
I mean, pink text.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Oh my god, so funny. You also started a production company. Tell us about it.
Okay. Where should I start? Okay. So let's just start with COVID hit. Mm-hmm. I already knew it was going to be it was going to be a terrible year because like literally January 2nd, I was like mental health crisis. I'm like, oh, fuck 2020. Right. And then a few months later, everyone was like, fuck 2022. I'm like, I told you. Anyways, so when COVID started, it just made everything worse. So literally the only thing that was keeping me going was like Zoom comedy shows. Cause I'm like, you know, you do comedy, you feel positive, you get into a virtual community of people, you see other people. Right. And then my show, I was like, you know what, if I can't do anything, I just want to bring joy to people during this apocalypse. Yeah. So I was like doing the show. It was weekly. Like I think we did weekly for like a good year until we switched to monthly, or now we're on hiatus, but like basically the idea if pre-COVID was that I was gonna start doing comedy shows in the summer, and the idea was always to do like a dual Zoom in-person hybrid show. But I was also like, hey, I want it to be as diverse as possible. I want to kind of I just want to be the person that changes the industry a little bit. When COVID was coming, I noticed that so many more producers of color and people and women and queer people were starting their own shows. And I was just like, this is amazing. this is amazing, right? Because you didn't have the barrier of, driving, safety, venues, potential homophobia or sexism from like random people. Like all that shit was like mostly gone or could be well controlled, but just like booting someone out. So as it went more and more, like kind of like the mission and the idea for Bongo Productions came about, right? It came about from this need of like, I don't want things to go back to normal. Like fuck normal comedy. Like what the hell is wrong with you? Like all like normal comedy shows are like 80% white males, one woman, maybe a black guy. And they'll either have the woman or the black guy as a diversity hire. And I'm just like, no, I don't want to do with that. Right. So the whole mission was to be able to lift up people that are Latinx, BIPOC, black, queer, indigenous, differently abled. So basically most of my shows, I started it in the CCC show, and you can see it in the lineup. Like there's always at least 2 queer people, like there's like myself and then someone else, but usually I try to have it like 2 to 3 queer people. There's always at least like a few different people of color. There's always like at least 50% women. Usually I try to go for a little bit more, but sometimes it's like at 50, sometimes a little less. And I try to make it so that it's like balanced and there's a bunch of diverse views and opinions on every single show. And then from there on, it's basically like I started with literally just the CCC show, and then I expanded to the All-Star Comedy show. I'm like, all right, the best and the best. And then I started like all these other shows, some of them that are kind of like, I'm like, this is too much to keep up with. But right now where we're at, we do a writer's workshop weekly that's starting up again next week. We do an open mic weekly. And then we have, I'm still trying to work out the shows. So I have a monthly neighborhood show that's like Zoom hybrid real life. And then we just had like another big event, which was a Pride and Joy show.
Yes.
Which was in downtown San Jose, but also live streamed. So I'm trying to really bring together like all these ideas of like, okay, like how can you make diversity and inclusion like a thing? And I'm like, the only way you can truly do it is make it in a way that's not patronizing, tokenizing, and incorporate it into every aspect of your business, right? Including the supply chain, like making sure that we work with organizations that do work in the community, donating to local orgs. So we donate to the TGIP Justice Initiative last year, which was for transgender, intersex, and gender variant folks inside and outside of the incarceration system, and donating to Black Lives Matter, a lot of like anti-police brutality and other stuff, donating to orgs that like fight poverty and food insecurity, donating to orgs fighting like Asian American health. So it's like trying to go for local orgs that are in our community and having an impact. Because I think unlike a lot of the comedy clubs that are out there, I'm not going to be neutral about situations of injustice. I'm not just going to be like, we had a day where people storm the Capitol and just be like, hey guys, are you coming to our show this Thursday? I'm gonna be like, no, let's have an open mic and talk about it, which we do, right? Hey, like, what do you guys think about this? Like, oh, we stand against like just like racism and sexism, and these are our views, right? And I think it's a little bit different, but I think the best way to do it is to tell people like, hey, I'm for you. I'm for your rights. I'm not a neutral party. I am a party that's for your basic humanity and dignities, and everyone's welcome here.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. Man.
Sorry, I think I just went on for like 20 minutes.
I mean, and that's so good because you're speaking my language. Like I love that. And I find it so important that we focus on those things. Like we tend to do mostly women shows, and obviously I'm queer, so we bring queer people in. It's easy in bigger cities, but it also, you have to be so deliberate about booking that.
Yeah, I would say, I say from the get-go to everyone, we spend 2 or 3 times as much booking than probably any other regular production company or comedy out there, right? Because we don't just be like, oh hey, like we're looking for a comedian, sign up. I'm like, no, I'm looking for a Black queer comedian with a missing leg, right? And then whoever signs up will sign up. But then I also look at their material. I'm like, okay, are they funny? And I'm like, okay, cool, you yell, right? But I'm really joking. That's extreme. But like, I think starting was a little bit the hardest because, I mean, I'd been in comedy for less than a year when I started. And I had connections, but I don't think I had very deep connections. So a lot of it was like, hey, asking people like, oh, do you know like Latinx comedians? Do you know a queer comedian? Do you know this person and that person? But then as we grew bigger, it just got easier, right? Starting was also hard because like no one wanted to do Zoom comedy. They're like, we'll just wait for real comedy to come back.
Totally.
I'm like,
in a couple of weeks, they're like, it was so, yeah. That is one thing with virtual comedy. There's no excuses for not being diverse in the virtual realm at all. And
I agree.
And that is like being deliberate on that, especially on that. Like you can take from anyone in any area. So you need to be diverse, you know?
Yeah. I think the best way now, I think I have like a few pipelines for talent, and like I'm good enough that I don't like have to do as much work as I used to. Like now I just have the list of like all these people. I'm like, I know I got you, but like before it was a lot of posting on different books. Like, hey, I'm looking for Black women comedians. I'm looking for women comedians. I'm looking for Asian American comedians. I'm looking for Indigenous comedians, right? Every post will have at least 1 to 2 to sometimes like 3 or 4 people that are just like, oh, hey, I guess you're not looking for funny comedians. Like, oh, hey, I guess you hate white men. And I was just like, ignore.
You're all with comments like that. Yes.
Right. Because I'm like, it's not necessarily about you. That doesn't mean you're not welcome, but like you're probably also on every other show ever.
Right.
So I don't need to create a space for you. Now, though, I think it's also just being intentional about looking at your weaknesses and looking at where you can do better. So I looked at last year and I'm like, okay, we did a great on getting a lot of Black people, Latinx people, and women, but we need to focus more on queer. So this year I've been actually trying to focus more on hiring more like, especially transgender comedians on like normal shows and then specialty shows. Cause I'm like, hey, like if I'm looking at people that are the most affected, I need to be booking them a lot more, but then booking them in a way where I'm not booking, like, yeah, I'll have like a all transgender women show for like Women's History Month. We did that. But I'm like, I will also book you on a regular show because you're not a token, you're a comedian, right? You're a woman who's a comedian, or you're a man who's a comedian, you're like whoever you are, or non-binary person that's a comedian, right? So like you shouldn't have to feel like they're only getting booked on specialty shows. You should be booked on their normal shows too, right? And I kind of look every once in a while, every few months I do like a survey. I'm like, all right, so I booked a lot of people of this ethnicity, but I have a, I need more people of that ethnicity, and then I'll look and I'll specifically target them like through different like groups, or I'll like go after other producers like, hey, do you know like a lot of Native American comedians? That's still a big weakness. There's a friend I know, Jackie Kali'a, who was part of a book on the Native comedy scene. I still have to buy that book and read through and then just like literally highlight names. Which I'm like, however way the comedians come to me is fine. But like it's on the booker and the producer to make the show diverse. And yeah, I'll take recommendation from people, but I'd rather put the work on myself rather than always putting it on like the person of color of just saying, hey, tell me every single person tell me this person or that person to book, because that's not necessarily their job. Their job is to just be a comedian and perform.
Right. I love it. You're golden.
Sometimes.
So you work in healthcare, and
yes.
This is my question. Are we gonna get another one of these?
Okay. So my degree was
Are you a psychic person in the middle?
No, okay, so I started out at Danza College studying biochemistry. I went to Cynthia State, transferred, and I finished my degree in biomedical engineering. I have over 4 years of lab experience in bio and chem. So when the WHO said that COVID-19 was they have like different risk levels for like these types of things, right? When they updated the threat level to highly likely, which was like a step below pandemic, that was about a month before we went into lockdown. That's when I freaked out. That is actually when I started creating my own emergency earthquake kit. I told all my friends, who none of them listened, like, hey, you guys should be careful. You know, we might go into this state. I talked to one of my friends in China who she lived not in Wuhan, but like next to Wuhan province. And she told me how they did the whole lockdown procedure. I'm like, okay, they might do the same thing here in the US. So I literally started preparing myself, just like everything internally. Everyone thought I was crazy. And then the lockdown happened and they're like, oh, never mind. We love you. Right? I also knew that based off of as soon as the lockdown happened, a lot of people adhere to it. Like California, I think most people adhere to it, but there are a lot of cases and pockets in the country where people are just like, it's my right, my freedom. I'm just like, you know, people are dying in Italy. Totally. I don't understand. And I kind of just realized, like, because of the way the US is, like, even if California is perfect, there's still people coming from out of state that can screw everything up. And
not all of California is perfect.
Yeah. So I was like, this is not going to take a month or two. If we're lucky, April. But like within like very short of a few months, we're literally still, a lot of people are not adhering to any of the guidelines. I'm like, we're going to be lucky if we get a vaccine and everything's open by next summer. And then I actually said this on Matthew McCarran's podcast, and I guess everything I said came true because we're open by summer.
Yeah. There was a point where because in January, I think I had COVID in January and February of 2020. Like I'm almost certain I had it. And I traveled too during that time. So luckily it wasn't terrible, but it was bad. Like it lasted a very long time. I felt like it was the worst thing I'd had in a while. So luckily my mom didn't get it from me, you know, but I remember making a joke about wearing masks in January. And I was like, don't mind me when I'm surviving the pandemic with a mask on. And I was like, that did not age well in March and April. And I almost felt like it would be a lot longer than a year. I'm not saying that we're perfect. Like we still have a long way to go and people are stupid as fuck, but
yeah, I mean, I think the Biden administration has to do with a lot of credit for that, because the Trump administration, he honestly should have locked down the whole country, or at least the pockets where there's the highest there were the highest COVID cases, which he did not do. He just like, I recommend y'all do whatever you want, right? So when Biden came in, I was kind of perplexed at first that he wasn't enacting a mask mandate. He was just like a mask recommendation, but he, you know, forced it on the federal buildings. But what he did instead was like, he basically tried to refocus efforts on getting vaccinations out, which, you know, like might mean that there's more deaths up front, which we saw happening like in winter. But it meant that long term, you have a population that's like, you know, more inoculated and resilient towards it. So I do credit a lot at the Biden, and then also the fact that we're in California and our governor cares about its people kind of not enough to like make it livable, but like to keep you alive, to suffer through the expensive rent.
But he's nice to look at. That's
it's true. Like literally, I used to watch all of like the White House press updates, and then like after a certain point, watching Trump just keep fucking up and having all those redactions sent out like an hour. Like, it was literally causing me like, I remember my heart was beating so fast for like a whole hour after watching his updates, and then I'm like, you know what, fuck it, and I just switched to just watching Gavin Newsom's update because I'm like, this is better. I don't need to watch a man trip over his own words and tell us to drink bleach.
Completely. And Deborah Burks, I was just like, oh my God, I can't. What?
Oh, that was that the black reporter that he always kept picking on, and it just like,
no, it's the white lady who was also an epidemiologist or whatever that worked on the AIDS crisis stuff. That lady at the beginning.
Yeah, she was trying to play both sides. She was trying to be like, Trump ain't that bad, but
I was like,
yeah, she's kind of gross. She was gross.
I was like, oh, really? Anyway.
Yeah.
We are luckily beyond that.
Yeah, but you did ask, like, how is it going to be like in the future? Like, so as a scientist, the correct answer is I don't know.
Correct.
Because so we are seeing new virus strains in India. We're seeing new virus strains in different pockets of the world. So far, they've like different. I haven't looked at the research. I'm a little bit behind because I've just been like napping all these days. I don't know how effective the different vaccine doses that we have been against that. But I am going to assume that, at least from my scientific opinion, COVID is here to stay. It might be like one of those things that eventually gets incorporated into the flu cocktail every year. It might be a point where, you know, all the companies will switch to like a 1-dose thing to make it easier. We might be getting boosters at some point, but COVID is pretty much here to stay. It's already been shown that it's pretty resilient. The other question that people don't really like to talk about, but that really should be brought up, is like how we prepare against future pandemics, right? Because if you think about it, we had the H1N1, we had Ebola, we had COVID-19, and it's not that far out to say that we could have another pandemic that's just as resilient and virulent as COVID-19 that could decimate a population. The whole question is like, how do we prepare a global infrastructure for it? Because we were not prepared. Like some places were, because like there's some countries in Africa that had faced the Ebola crisis that were a little bit more prepared, and some places in Europe. But like as a whole, in terms of the way that there was not a unified response, especially politically in the United States, and a lot more people died than should have. So. That's my scientific opinion.
I like that. That's a great note to end on.
We're ending what?
No, I'm with that. We're all gonna die in the next one. So humanity, it's our own fault. But I do love what you said. Like, and when it comes down to it, this is the thing that I believe more than anything, that we have to be globally unified and all on the same page, at least on a level that can respond immediately. Because whether we like it or not, we are a global society. We are interconnected so much that we saw it just spread around, that we have to think globally and act locally.
You said it. You said it, girl.
I did. Oh my God, this has been so fun and so enlightening. Where can people find you?
Oh, at Cynthia in Public on Instagram, at Cynthia in Public on Facebook, at Bongo Productions on Instagram, at Bongo Productions on Facebook. That's it. At some point, amazing. I'll like set up a TikTok. But,
it's a lot of work.
It's too much work. I don't feel like I'm young enough for it.
I mean, I posted 3 things that got boomered left and right, and I was like, whatever.
Yeah,
rad,
I mean, the first thing,
the word rad is still viable and vibrant.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first thing I posted, they just said like hashtag FYP, FYP. I'm like, what the heck is FYP? They're like, for your page. I'm like, what does that mean? And then I was like Googling it. I was like, what does for your page mean? They're like, oh, it's for your page. I'm like, what is that? This isn't relevant. This isn't helpful. Like, I don't know. The hashtags are different. I'm like, this is too much.
Find Cynthia in public on your page. FYP. Thank you so much, dear. And that is all the time we have for this week. Thank you so much for listening to the I Love Funny Women podcast.
You can find us on all the social media at I Love Funny Women and find us on YouTube as well.
This podcast was written by me.
And me.
And you can find me on all the socials at Dina Nina Martinez.
And you can find me on at Lalita Dee Comedy. DWE, Lalita Dee Comedy.
Find our guest Cynthia in public on all the socials at Cynthia in public.
And door girl Greg is on Instagram at Gigi Potter.
And our lovely announcer Crysta Garner is on Instagram at Crysta Garner.
This is an Artemis Glow studio production
in association with Crossover Media and AMG. Have a great week.